So, do you know what time it is? As a producer, it's going to be your job to know what time it is, know how long your show is running, knowing if your show is ahead of schedule, if it's behind schedule, or if you're going to need to make some adjustments on the fly. So we're going to dive in a little bit today about time. And as a part of a producer job, you're going to have to be able to calculate time in your head pretty much on the fly. So one of the things about being a producer is you have to make sure that you're going to fill your allotted time. And not all shows are the same depending on the time of day, national news or things going on like that. You're going to have to make some adjustments. So one of the things that you're going to have to look at is going to be how much time do you have to fill? And with that, you kind of have to just look at what you're working with. So in the case of this particular show, I can see that the show begins not exactly at 6 p.m., but at 5:59:05. So while one show is ending, another show is kind of overlapping it. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll use a DVE to squeeze down the credits or how one show is ending, or they might squeeze it in a little bit to thin it up, and then put in your anchors or something else in the other side of it. So they can tease what's coming up for the next show. So then at 6 o'clock, you're ready to roll. So for this newscast, our show is going to run about 30 minutes and 18 seconds. So we've got a lot of commercial breaks in this. In fact, we've got about 5 commercial breaks. So they're going to be about 2 minutes each. So that's going to take about 10:40 out of our show. Sports, it's going to be a busy time. Maybe we got the World Series going on. Maybe we have Olympics. So we're going to be, sports is going to want to take about 4 minutes out of our show for that. Weather, we've got some severe weather possibly happening that's going to be cutting into our show as well. So weather may say, you know what, I'm going to need a little bit of extra time today to talk about the drought, to talk about the hurricane that's coming in or something along those lines. So then we've also got like teases and chats. So going into commercial breaks, we may show video to talk about what's coming up. The anchors may need to chat to kind of fill up a little bit of time. So we're going to take about 2.5 minutes out of that. And then sometimes newscasts will have a non-traditional segment. So for this newscast, they have a 3.5 minute segment called Law Call. And this is a segment that shows like every Friday at one of our local stations where a law firm has paid money for advertising for 3.5 minutes. And during those 3.5 minutes, they may give you advice on what to do if you're pulled over, what happens if police try to search you or your vehicle, what are your rights if tax collectors or something like that is coming in to harass you. So they'll give you some information. And for this particular show, they need 3.5 minutes. So when everything's taken out of our 30-minute show, we've only got 5 minutes and 8 seconds to fill with news content. So when you're dealing with the news, you're going to have to do some calculations, and it's all going to add up. So real quick, what's 20 plus 30? 50. Very good. What's 20 plus 40? Well, now it's 60. And in the realm of time, 60 is going to equal 1 minute. So let's add 20 and 50. That's going to give us 70. Or in this case, 20 seconds and 50 seconds gives us 70 seconds. So if you're going to convert that into time, that's now a minute 10 because 60 seconds is in a minute. We had 10 seconds left over. So 35 and 35, also 70. 22 and 49, that's going to be about 71 seconds. And for that, that's going to translate over to a minute 11. We're going to add a minute 20 and 38. So that's going to give us like 158. So that's good time on there. 2:15 and 1:45. I know 2 and 1 is 3. 15 and 45 is an extra minute. So we're looking at 4 minutes. We're going to add 1:35 and 1:42. So 1 and 1 and 2, 32 for 5 and 42 is going to round over to a minute 17. So we got 3:17. So when you're looking, how does this correlate into a newscast? Well, when we're adding times together, we're going to be dealing with 2 types of times. We've got the total story time. How long is this individual story? Then we've got a running total of how long all of these stories combined together are going to cost. So we've got a 20-second story. So our total runtime is currently 20 minutes into our newscast. So let's add a 40-second VO. So I'm going to take this 20. I'm going to add 40 to it. So our runtime for the current show is we're now a minute into our show. Let's add a SOT. We're now a minute and 30. We're now a minute and a half into our show. Package is going to be 130. So a minute and 30 and a minute 30 is 3 minutes. Then we're going to add in a page graphic. So 3 minutes and 46 is 46 seconds. And one thing to note, when you're adding in times for your stories, when you're breaking down the stories into VOs and slots and packages, you only time what you can hear. So during a VO, the anchor never stops talking. So even though you may have a 30-second VO, I'm only going to add the time for the anchor script. Likewise with the page graphic. So our 30 and 46 is going to give us 3 minutes and 46 seconds. So let me hop out of the way for a second. And we're going to say, we're going to throw in a VOSOT. And so again, this is, we're only adding the anchor's text and the SOT. We're not doing the VO. So 346 and 53 is 439. And then we're going to add one last package. That's 215. So when we go back and look at this, 439 and 215 gives us 654. So in our newscast, we are at 654. And I remember from our previous page that we only had 508 to fill. So we went over our time. We went over it by a good bit. In the case when we got up to the VOSOT, we were still not there. We still had 21 and 8. We had 29 seconds to get us to the 508. But in this case, we went over our time, so we have to figure out how to rebudget our time to get back down to 508. So with the package that's 215, maybe turn that into a VOSOT, or if there's something that I really need this package for, I may have to delete another package or something to get that time with. So as a producer, they're constantly looking at how much time they've got to fill. So another look at how this kind of all breaks down. So for at the beginning of our show, we've got 30 seconds. It's going to take us to do that tease where we're squeezed into a little box and we'll tell you tonight we've got info on story 1, we've got story 2, we've got story 3, all that and more. Stay tuned. We've got weather, we got sports. Our news is going to start right now. And that's going to take us into our open. So for this, it's going to take the anchors 30 seconds to read that squeeze tease. There's no video, so the total story time is 30. Our runtime is 30. The open, it's just an animated, quick little video that's going to play for about 20 seconds. There's no anchor text. So our 20-second total story time becomes 30 and 20 is 15. So we now have a runtime of 50 seconds into the show. We should be completing the rundown. Let's add in our first story. So it's going to take the anchor 16 seconds to introduce this ability experience package. The package itself is a minute 28. Add their text plus that's going to give us our total story time of a minute 44. And by this point, we're now 2:34 into our show. So let's add in a package. That'll get us up to 419. We're going to add another package, so we're at about 654. And this is going to take us into our first commercial break. It's going to take the anchors about 30 seconds to say, we'll be right back. But when we do, we're going to have stories about weather. We're going to have stories about sports. And we're going to have a really cute story about an alligator and a kitten who are best friends. Stay tuned. Our news is going to be back after this commercial break. And for this, they're doing about a minute for the commercial break. 10 seconds is going to be that restart of that bumper, where it's going to be a video that's going to say, now with sports, here's Sports Anchor. And so that's going to take up a little bit of time. So our total break is a minute 40. It's a minute 10 for the PSA or the commercial, 10 seconds for the restart, 30 seconds for the anchors to read it. So now by the time this is done, we should be about 8:34 into our show. If our show started at 6, then we're now at 6:08 and 34 seconds. So now we're going to add a VO, and this one's going to get a little bit tricky because, again, I told you when you're dealing with VOs, you don't add the time of the VO to your story. So for this, the anchors are going to read non-stop. They're going to start at the beginning of the story, and they're going to keep reading all the way to the end, and it's going to take them about 40 seconds to read that script. And then during the video, we're going to play during that anchor script, we're going to play an appropriate video that may take about 30 seconds. But again, we don't time VOs because the anchors never stop talking. So for our VO, our script is straight up 40, and our time is going to be 9:14 into our show. So let's add another one, and I'm going to disappear for a little bit. So for this, we have our a VO SOT. So the anchors are going to read their script along with their VO component. That's going to run 43 seconds. Then the anchors are going to stop reading, and there's going to be a 22-second interview. So our 43 plus 22 gives us a total story time of 1:05. And then when you add it to the rest of the show, we are now about 10:19 into our show. So wrong button. So now let's add in another SOT. So for this story, we've got men's golf. It's going to take about 35 seconds, and for the anchors to read the introduction and a little bit about the SOT. Then it's going to take 13 seconds for the actual interview. So 35 and 13 is 48 for our total story time for men's golf. And then by the time we add it into our show and our total rundown, we're now up to 1:11 into the script. So what I want to show you right now is going to be a quick little clip about a producer that had a 30-minute show, and she thought that she had actually filled up her entire show with content, and that by the time the anchors were saying have a good night, they were ready to go off the air. But she miscalculated somewhere, and the anchors had to fill up a little bit of extra time to make sure that the show went off the air. Now, since this is a commercial station, she can't just throw in commercials to fill in the end of the space, because they have contracts with the people who provide the commercials. So the people who are paying for the commercials, their contract says you're only going to get 5 slots of airtime for this amount. They can't just give out free commercial space to the anchors, or they can't just jump ahead to the next show. So they have to fill their 30-minute time. So let's take a look at this show that didn't quite end on time as the producer had hoped.
Lisa Quintana reporting live. Thank you.
That's true.
Isn't that great?
It's a
No
great cause.
small cause either, not at all. Very serious life with that here.
That's true. Like right here, because they're telling us to stretch.
That's right.
What do you want to talk about? What
I
about the
wasn't going to
game?
tell him that.
It's going to be very cold, Rich tells us. It's a very important thing because it's going to knock down the Raiders' passing attack. Bills should be able to run the ball on them. Bills should win.
All
You
right.
heard it here.
Oakland's going to be out there saying,
And speaking of it's
Yes.
going to be cold.
Cold temperatures moving in for the weekend. We have some unsettled weather for the next couple of days. We're going to have to watch out for freezing rain tomorrow night. So that could make driving quite treacherous.
And that is going to be tough to drive in, too.
There's that forecast right there. We'll just recap the weekend. Look at that, single digits for Saturday and Sunday. But again, in the near term, we're talking about freezing rain. Looks like it's going to happen for tomorrow night in our area.
Okay. And I think that's going to do it for us. Make it a great night.
Good night.
bye-bye.
Okay, so they filled some way to time the show, Linda. So they wound up filling some time a little bit by having the anchors chit chat with each other. They then went over to weather and let weather recap a little bit of what was going on. They then talked to sports and let them talk about what was going on. And then they are filling it up. It's been 1 minute since they stopped talking. So then they fill that time with credits. They filled that time with music. And so now they're still trying to round out the end of their show. And so they've even gone in, they told the camera people to kind of move the cameras around. And so right now we've already gone into 2 minutes since the anchor stopped talking, or 2 minutes since the producer went in their ears and told them, you've got to stretch for a little bit. She probably didn't tell them how long to stretch. And so now they're just sitting here awkwardly. So by the time the producer told them to start stretching, they were at 226 into that. And so they even went into the credits, and they had a little bit of fun by saying, hey, way to time out your show, Linda. You did not do a good job. So somehow or another, she had gotten off by about 2.5 minutes. And I'm not sure what or how that had happened. So one of the things that we're going to look at is kind of fitting into a show. So when you're dealing with a show, you're going to be dealing with the terms that are over or under, or likewise light or heavy. So if a show is taking too long and you're going to go off the air before you finish your content, your show is going to be heavy, and you're going to have to kill something to bring it back. If your show is running light, then that means you're going to end your content before you go off the air. In the case of the newscast we just saw, they were about 220 light. So the producer would have to quickly run in and figure out what to add to the show to get it to come back to that time. So in this case, producers looking at their time, and they're saying, okay, I've got 4:45 left of my air before we go off the air. I've got 4 minutes and 10 seconds left of my content. That means I've got an extra 35 seconds to fill somehow. Or in this case, if it was flipped and the producer started looking, okay, I've got 4:10 for my air. My content is 4:45. Then I went beyond my airtime by 35 seconds. And a lot of times mini rundowns will indicate the run times, which kind of helps the producers gauge. I've seen some producers with stopwatches, so they can kind of time out when their show is going. And so they can kind of look at how a show is evolving story by story, break by break, line by line. So you can kind of see that for a show, you're going to start off at 0. You'll get 5 minutes into it, 10 minutes, 15, 25. When you start getting into like that 28, 25, your time's going to be getting relatively close to the end. 30 in this case is perfect where you want to hit. If you went 5 seconds over, then you've gone over your time. And again, you're going to go off the air before you're ready for it or not. So another way that I've seen some people talk about time and content is to think about a glass and how much water you put into it. So if you've got about 1:35 worth of water and your glass is 1:35, it's going to come up perfectly. If your glass is 1:40 for your time and you only got 1:35, you're going to have extra. If your glass is representing 3 minutes of airtime and you've only got 1:35 of content to go in it, then you're going to have to fill up a lot of stuff. Likewise, if you've got just a minute of container, 1:35, and you went over, all that content just kind of flows out. So you want to make sure that your show is going to wind up ending just when you want it to. And that's where your rundown is going to come into place. And a lot of times the software is also going to help you out. So for this story, as we plug in all of our individual times, like 1:53 or 1:37, the software is going in and it's calculating the time for us. So for our show, when we start at 0 and we end at 30 minutes, we have a perfect show. And again, it's going to count for us. It's going to count up. It's also going to count down. So we tell the software we have 30 minutes and it says, okay, after you do your 30-second intro, you now have 29:30 to fill. So I can look and go into campaign 2016 and I know at the end of the time, I should have 22:09 left on my clock. So one of the things that we happen to do, and I'm looking at the end of this show, and I see that we have a PSA allocated for the end of the show. That's 30 seconds, and that's going to end us out on time. If we wind up running over, then we could kill the PSA. Now, one of the things that we also have for us to help us out is a clock. And this is a dual clock that we start with 30 minutes at the beginning of our show. And then by the end of the show, this clock will hit 0. So we've just gone into a segment called Trojan Talk. And this Trojan Talk is an interview segment that usually takes about 5 to 6 minutes to fill our time. And so I'm looking at our clock and I know that at the end of Trojan Talk, I'm going to need 4 minutes and 20 seconds to do the rest of the show. So I need 4:20 to do Health Minute, Take a Look at This, Weather Wrap, Close, and the PSA. So I'm glancing at our show And I can quickly subtract 9:55 from 5:30. This means I've got, at the end of my show, I've got 4 minutes and 25 seconds left to fill the content. Of that 425, I need 420 to fill, or to fill everything else. So that tells me my show is 5 seconds under. So I've got to fill an extra 5 seconds of the show some way, somehow. So what I might do is I'll probably go into the close and change that 25 to 30. Give the anchors a little more time to close. We have credits that we can run, and the credits we can kind of speed up or slow down as we need to get us the time that we need to make sure that our show is going to time out and we're going to end with 0 on the clock. So as a producer, it's going to be your job to always make sure that even during a show that you're not running too fast or you're not running too slow. Some of the things that can change the time of your show is people talking. So depending on who your anchor is, they're going to read at different rates. You may have one anchor that just reads very slow and methodically says everything. You may have another anchor that's going to talk a lot faster. They may talk a lot louder. And those two different anchors are not going to be reading the same pace at the same time. So one anchor might be speeding up your show, and the other anchor might be slowing your show down. So things like that can come into play, especially if you have types of stories such as copies, where your anchors are doing nothing but reading an entire content of a story, or likewise with a VO. So if you have an anchor who's reading slow and they're doing nothing but copy, then you may wind up running out of time at the end of your show. Or likewise, if that anchor reads really, really fast, then you may wind up getting ahead of schedule and having to fill some time, like 5 seconds, like we did. So reading is going to be one thing that's really going to throw off the time of your newscast. Likewise, you're also going to run into issues from time to time where your stories may not be the exact length that they tell you. They may tell you your package is 1:52. Well, it's actually 1:51, so you're off by 3 seconds now. Usually they try to get it right, but that's not always the case. And it's going to be your job as the producer to make sure that your show is timed